The Creative Jungle podcast is all about speaking to and learning from inspiring entrepreneurs, creatives, and well-being experts. In each episode, we discuss their unconventional lives and journeys, what they've learned and how they've got to where they are now, any tips they can share with you so that you too may live a much more creative and happier life.
The podcast is brought to you by us, Dan and Sam. We're a couple who set up M.Y.O and Creative Jungle Company, and we are all about helping people get creative and bringing a little bit more creativity to life and business. We host over 14 different arts and crafts workshops from our central London studio, virtually offsite at events and festivals. We have a range of creative kits, and we also run creative thinking workshops. So having helped thousands of people, we think we know a thing or two about helping people get creative and perhaps being a little bit happier. We hope to see you in the studio at some point soon too.
Be sure to subscribe so you can hear about future episodes. Right, let's get started. Here's the next episode. So today on the podcast, we are very honored to have the amazing Zoë Aston. She is a therapist, mental health consultant, and creator of Your Mental Health Workout. Zoë has over a decade's experience consulting for companies, brands, teams, and gyms to help make looking after your mental health accessible and acceptable to everybody. Her practice offers a range of emotional and psychological tips, including dealing with addiction, eating disorders, trauma, anxiety, and relationship issues, as well as being a registered and accredited member of the BACP, the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy.
And in addition to all that, Zoë is the author of Your Mental Health Workout, Quick and Easy Techniques for Coming Out of Lockdown, and also Your Mental Health Workout, which is a free online program with tips and guidance to help you look after the integrity of your mind. I guess given the impact of COVID on everybody's lives and the challenges it has presented, we really wanted to have you on the show, Zoë. So thank you for agreeing to coming on. We think this is going to be very interesting and helpful to people.
Yeah, absolutely. We have tons of questions. And I think a good place to begin is where you started. You know, you started out being a dancer and you set up the Interlude Dance Troupe in 2004 when you were 16 and ran it for over 10 years. How did that come about? And then how did that kind of lead you to transition to where you are now?
I think that's a great question. Very few interviews or podcasts that I do go back that far into my history, but yeah, absolutely right. When I was 16, I set up this dance company, which I called Interlude. Interlude was always going to be a temporary name because I couldn't think of anything else. It just kind of stuck. I think it sort of worked.
I love that.
I remember I was going down the back of the Ludacris had an album out at the time called Chicken and Beer or something. Anyway, I was looking for sort of inspiration of the track names, and there was an interlude in it, and I thought, that's got a ring to it, so I went with that. Nice. But anyway, yeah, I set up Interlude kind of because at 16, you know, I was always a good dancer. I wasn't the best. And I felt at 16, you know, I was sort of in my grown up body, so to speak, but I wasn't good enough to dance with the adults and I wasn't little enough to dance with the kids. There wasn't much out there at the time in terms of like youth dance, and you know, now we have like dance crews and troops and teenagers are doing it all over the place. But you know, 2003, 2004, there wasn't really that much going for younger teenagers. So I just literally woke up one day and was like, I'm going to start a dance company. And my dad was like, yeah, he was like, okay. And I was like, all right, so this is how it's going to work. And I said, all right, I need a little bit of help. I need to borrow the money so I can put an advert in the Stage magazine, which was where all the auditions were at the time. And then I had some auditions, I got some dancers, and then he was like, okay, well, now you need to find them a gig. And I was like, okay. So I applied for this sort of, I don't know what you'd call it. It was sort of a montage of different talents going on at Her Majesty's Theatre that year. And that was our first gig, and it kind of went from there.
Wow, what a first gig.
Yeah. So I think I've always had this, and Your Mental Health Workout is the same. I've always had a slight unconscious awareness of like the gaps in not the world, but the gaps in the markets that I'm kind of interested in, because neither Interlude nor your mental health workout were like intentional. I wasn't targeting a gap intentionally. There was something missing for me.
Yes.
So instead of waiting for someone else to create it, I was like, right, well, I'm going to do it.
Out of interest, sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
Go on.
Out of interest, what gave you the confidence to just go for it?
Yeah.
Like, it sounds like your dad was supportive at the start, but was it
You
naivety?
have that enterprising spark.
Yeah.
What gave you that spark to go, yeah, I'll do it?
I don't know is the honest answer. I'm very stubborn, and I've been described as bloody minded in the past. I've always had a drive. I've always been very individually driven. I love working with teams and I love working with people, and it's always been what I've done. I've worked companies, and now I'm a therapist, so I talk to people all day, and I've worked in big teams, which I've really, really enjoyed. But ambition, or maybe fulfilling my potential, has always been part of my story, part of my journey. I think partly because I was so shy when I was younger. So when I started coming out of that shyness, it was like, oh my God, actually, I can do this, and I can do this, and I can do this, and I can do this. And I honestly believe, I say it in the book that's coming out next month, it sounds cheesy, but when you're aligned with that, your potential is never ending.
Amen to that. Absolutely. Yeah, I can see it. I totally believe that. I think people realize it as the older they get. Absolutely. As you say, when you're younger, you're still kind of finding yourself, and you might be like, oh, I'm not the coolest kid, or I'm not the smartest, or I'm not the best. But then as you grow up and you suddenly find your groove, and you're like, and you feel like, yeah, this is my lane, and actually I can totally own this. I can totally do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the game changer for me as an adult was realizing that although I'd done Interlude before, and that at the time I couldn't appreciate quite what I was doing, I look back on it now and I think that is my biggest achievement to date. I mean, the work I'm doing now is really great, but when I look at the effect that had on all the children involved, or the teenagers involved, I still get messages saying, just want to let you know how amazing that experience was, and I'm still friends with these people. And it's still in the dance industry now, the newbies don't know anything about it because it was a long time ago, nearly 20 years ago.
Is it still running?
No, as I became there was a crossover. There was a few years where I crossed over being a therapist and dancing, and then I sort of slowly just transitioned into mental health completely. But what I realized now is that as long as I feel that what I'm doing is good enough, it's great. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be amazing. And if I could do Interlude again with what I know now about being good enough and believing that I am good enough, to use your words, I would absolutely do it again with that mindset. And I think that's the thing. Anyone who's starting a business or is creative or has these ideas, I would say, follow your potential, follow your ambition, but no, it doesn't have to be amazing. It just has to be good enough, and you keep building on good enough, and that's how you get these big ideas off the ground.
Yeah, and you'll enjoy it a lot more, I imagine, as well. Like, I think a lot of people struggle with the striving all the time, and not fully appreciating how good it is right now. That's a good point.
How did you go from the dance then into therapy? What sparked that transition?
Yeah, so good question again. While I was dancing, I'd always danced, and when I was about 14, I sort of decided that dancing was what I was going to do, not singing or acting. I'm not a particularly good singer or actor, but you have to kind of make a decision at one point. And I went to stage school, I went to dance college, I started Interlude while I was at stage school. But I'd always had, in hindsight, struggled with sort of shyness, anxiety, depression. I'd always had funny eating habits. And when I was a teenager, I became very poorly with an eating disorder, which was kind of like on and off. And while I was running Interlude, actually, it was pretty severe, but I was quite high functioning, so no one really noticed. And I was at dance college, so you're expected to be very slender and not eat very much, and all the sort of horrible things that go with being at dance college. But soon after I left dance college, I got really unwell and ended up going into therapy and going into treatment for my eating disorder and some self-harming behaviors. And when I came back from that, I picked Interlude back up. Someone else had been running it for me while I was sort of sorting myself out. I picked it back up again but something had sort of changed within me. That makes me laugh because isn't that's a line from Wicked or something, isn't it?
Yeah.
Something had changed within me. Something was not the same, and I just had a different. I was less hard on myself, I think, and I was more focused on trying to get better than being the best dancer or winning the competition. Or I just sort of lost part of that like raw, edgy, I suppose. I was no longer a sort of naive adolescent. I was in my early 20s, and all of a sudden I had all this knowledge about myself and the world. And I thought, this is really hard on me. Like, the dance industry is really hard on me. And it's not that I probably couldn't have made it. In fact, when I look back, I'm kind of like, I thought I was rubbish at times. And I look back and I'm like, but all these things were happening. No one else thought you were rubbish. Like, everyone else thought you were great. Everyone else loved you. Everyone else wanted you as their friend. It was me who had the problem with me. And when that started coming together, I sort of thought, oh, I mean, I just don't know if I can cope with the uncertainty of what that brings me. And I thought, oh, what else will I do though? Because it's all I've ever done. And as the story goes, I was sitting in a park, and I was sitting opposite the North London Priory. And I thought, do you know what? I really like talking to people. That's what I've learned from therapy. I really enjoy these conversations. And I thought, I'm going to apply to do a therapy thing. And I went home and I applied for this course on a whim. They turned me away the first year because with psychology courses, they like you to have a bit of life experience. And I was only 22 at the time. They said, go and do a foundation year, partly also because I only had performing arts in my history. So they were a bit like, we need you to have some kind of like academic experience. So I went and did a foundation year at Birkbeck University. And then I went back and did my master's in counselling and psychology. And the moment that I knew that this was where I was supposed to be was that I was discussing with my parents, you know, how I was going to pay for it. They very kindly paid for dance college, which was very expensive, and also I wasn't very well, so I think they understandably they weren't really interested in investing more money. And we were sort of talking about how that was going to work, and I came home and I had a message on my landline at the time, because we still have them, about the fact that I'd got one of the scholarships that I'd applied for. And I just thought, oh my God, all these doors have been opened. This is easy. Like, my way into this is easy. This is where I'm supposed to be. Dancing always felt difficult for me. The psychotherapy thing, the psychology thing, all the opportunities were there being like just presented to me. And I was like, aha, this is where I'm supposed to be. So that was the crossover. And for lots of years, I couldn't. Everyone was like, you should be a dance therapist or do movement therapy or whatever. And I couldn't match the two. But what helped was, as I progressed through my psychology career, was this idea of, you know, the body being a metaphor for the mind, which it took me a while to kind of get to. But your mental health workout is exactly that. It's me using what we know about the body and how we kind of use our bodies to understand the things that we can't see about ourselves. So that's sort of that's sort of the best way I can explain how they all
merged together. Absolutely. And I can really see it now, actually, when you've described your story, because I remember you saying that about your mental health workout. You know, we all know how to work out, how to look after our bodies, but it becomes so muddled when we think about our minds. But actually we could apply that same structure. I really like that.
I know a lot of people that listen to the podcast are thinking about career changes. And I know this is a bit of a curveball question, but it's just because we kind of touched on that topic. And it's something that Diana sees a lot as well. Is kind of when you decide on something, it's almost like the pathway opens up. Like, is that safe to say that happened with you? Once you had the conviction, I wanted to go down this route, the scholarship came, like it all became a lot clearer.
Yeah, I mean, I would say when I was younger, say 10 years ago, I found it really difficult to take responsibility for the hard work that I put into things. So I'd be like, oh, I'm lucky, or I was in the right place at the right time. But the truth is, and people used to say to me, I had a boss that once said to me, she was like, and she was like, and you're hardworking, and you're reliable, and you're loyal, and you show up, and you take criticism on the chin, and, you know, you're teachable, you're adaptable, you learn quickly. I was like, oh, okay. And now when I look back, I am all of those things, but it was difficult for me to kind of own that part of my drive, I guess I'd call it. So, I mean, for anyone who's looking for a career change, you know, yes, it's going to be hard work. Yes, there's going to be difficult feelings about it. Yes, you're going to doubt your decision at one point and think this is a really bad idea. And are you going to be any good at this new thing or not? But if you are, and I suppose I could use this across the board for physical and mental health as well, you know, it's when the novelty of it wears off, when the commitment kicks in, that's when you really learn whether you really want it. And I've always been, I know when I want things. It's just a feeling that I get, even when I'm shopping, you know, I don't buy anything that I'm not like, yeah, that's great, I want that. Like there's a certain sort of reaction that I have. And I'm like, no, I really want this. I really want this. And I will sort of, I experience setbacks, of course, but I refuse to believe in kind of failure and setbacks as a concept.
Yes.
So I always think like, okay, well, hang on, what have I learned from this? Or like, okay, so that's not the way I'm going to go. I'm going to go this way.
Yeah.
And I think the thing about career change is that people worry that they're going to fail.
Yeah.
And I always say to my clients, I'm like, yeah, but what if actually it's not, you can't fail. It's just an experiment. You're just sort of testing it out. And if it doesn't work, it's okay. Try something else.
Yeah. I think it's hard, but it's learning to think of failure not as a permanent thing. It's not permanent. It's a transitioning. It's as you've just said, realizing that, oh, maybe this won't work, but this might, or maybe this is not for me, but this is. It's just a transitioning.
It's like it's good to rule out options sometimes. It doesn't always have to
you
be
always
the
say
option.
that.
Exactly. And there's been some times at the moment, I nearly did a PhD last year, and then I sort of thought, well, I'm not really sure about this. I was writing the book, and then they've just emailed me again, and I can feel, I'm like, yeah, I would like to do a PhD, but is that just because I want to be called doctor, or do I actually want to do it? You know, and I can feel myself, I'm like, I'm not sure. And for me, that's probably a sign that it's a no.
It's
in
a
the
no.
long run. I might look into it a little bit, but I mean, we'll see. Maybe next year I'll be telling you that I'm doing a PhD. You know, the opportunity is there. It's been presented to me. I don't have that like, yes, absolutely, that's my next thing.
It's not with absolute certainty.
As an example.
And this kind of brings us nicely to present day. So this is a bit of a long-winded question, but there's like over 20,000 passionate followers on Instagram, which is amazing. And you give really good, useful, practical advice and support and inspiration to all those followers, and they really, really enjoy it. And from doing research on this, it's so many things aligned with what we as a couple kind of believe in. So thank you for sharing all that. What's that journey been like, I guess, of growing that audience and sharing and being helpful? And how do you approach social media in general? Because I know there's lots of pros and lots of cons to social media, and some people struggle with it.
So, I mean, working backwards, I think the most important part of that question is the social media question. And I stick to using social media for good. I think there are some very negative things about social media, but I think you can curate your experience on social media to be helpful to you. But you have to be willing to do that. So, for example, on my feed, on Your Mental Health Workout, or indeed on my personal account, I make sure that I'm not at the mercy of what other people post. And I do that by not following people who are going to upset me or irritate me, or I'm going to compare myself against. And I think that's a really important thing to say, because the problem with social media and mental health is that when you log on to social media, you are in the hands of what anyone else may have posted that day, and you just cannot predict whether it's going to make you feel better or make you feel worse. So if there's any discrepancy or any concern around how your social media feed is going to help make you feel, then you've got to start creating it so that, you know, when you go onto social media, you're going to find inspiration. You know, and mine is so much so that actually I was thinking, I did some more therapy, like personal therapy recently, and there was something that she said, and I thought, yeah, but I just have to log onto social media to get that information. You know, I don't necessarily need, and this leads me into the other bit nicely, I don't necessarily need a therapist, to pay a therapist to get that info. That is now available to me by the social media world that I've created. Which leads me to why I set up a social media account, and why I think other millennial therapists are doing the same thing. Because fundamentally, I believe that some of the information that people pay therapists for, we shouldn't have to pay for. stuff around self-esteem, stuff around boundaries, stuff around understanding trauma, understanding family dynamics, understanding burnout, stress, grief, and how to manage all of those things. We should just have that information available to us. And after, I think it was, I don't know, maybe 8 years of being a therapist, I said to my dad, I was like, Dad, how can I like get this information outside of the therapy room? Because I'm sitting in four walls with a confidentiality statement in place. But when I talk to my friends and they tell me they've got a problem, and I'm like, well, that you can just use a boundary there. And they're like, oh my God. Or I'll be like, like that's a self-esteem thing. And they're like, oh my God, so if I just start to believe in myself, then that will change. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like we shouldn't have to train and pay people to tell us these things. And he said he always worked in TV, and he was like, well, film yourself talking and see if you like it. And I was like, oh, okay. So, and then my little sister, she was like, oh, IGTV is the new YouTube. And I said, oh, okay, well, I'll start an IGTV channel. And that's kind of how it came about. And I think there's when I started doing it, there's lots of accounts on mental health and people who have been through their own mental health experiences, as have I, but there are only a handful of people who are qualified to actually give advice or direction that isn't going to cause harm in any way. It's very difficult sometimes when you're giving advice around mental health to make sure that you're not going to cause any harm. And of course, as psychotherapist or any medical or health professional, the first thing is do no harm. And I think it can be very dangerous, is probably too strong a word, but if we're just listening to people who are sharing their own journey, what we lose is like the nuance of what's going to work for us. So your mental health workout, the account is kind of run by the followers. So they send in questions, they do votes. I mean, I'm ultimately in charge of it, but we do votes around topics, and I take the things that they want to hear about so that it stays relatively current. But also I'm not just sharing my experience of, I don't know, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, self-harm, and therefore it's not going to be triggering to anyone. It's not going to be something that's going to do someone any harm. But I think the main thing is that there's lots of information out there around physical and nutritional health. And people say, well, eat this and do this exercise and then you'll get that. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if we could, and this is quite a long-winded answer, but if we could have a program like that for our mental health. Now, it is not new to be giving people like steps to do stuff. If you look at CBT, for decades people have been given do this and this when you're this. The difference is that CBT models, DBT models, all those kind of things that are available to us are targeted at people who have already identified that they've got a problem that they want to get better from. And my push is that actually, you don't go to the gym because you're hurt or broken. In fact, you can't go if you're hurt and broken. You have to rest. Anyone has the right to look after their mental health. You do not have to be talking about anxiety or depression or trauma or addiction or codependency or any of that in order to have the right to apply these things to your life. Which has made the sort of CBT stuff a little bit inaccessible. So I hope that your mental health workout as a program and the account and the website and all of that is what is available and works for people who are both struggling with diagnosable mental health problems, but also people who are just like, do you know what? I want to get my brain in better shape. I want to get my mind in better shape, and I don't need to be poorly to do that. So I hope it's kind of a wide berth, and that's what differentiates it from the sort of old school CBT type steps that we kind of are all aware of.
Nice. So very practical, helpful, and like everybody can take something from some of it, which is really good. But I guess kind of touching on that point a little bit, like how do you feel the perception of mental health has changed in recent years? Like you kind of touched on it there, that people are being more mindful themselves, even if it's not necessarily an illness, it's still something that should be taken care of. Have you seen that change a lot in recent years, and kind of what excites you or worries you about the future?
It definitely has changed in recent years. And on the book that's coming out next month, which is the full program, like the 5-week program, on the first page, I literally talk about stigma and shame and why people don't reach out for help with their mental health.
Yeah.
And how that is changing. And I think our generation, the millennials, have definitely changed that, because I see a generation of people that are like determined to heal from whatever it is that we're carrying for our ancestors and our generational trauma, and wherever you come from, whatever culture you come from, there's always stuff that travels through families.
Yeah.
And I think the millennials, as a sort of collective unconscious, this is actually what I'm thinking about doing the PhD on, funnily enough, are trying to heal from transgenerational trauma.
Yeah. Clean slate, almost, just like wipe the slate clean. And and so I think the perception of mental health has changed because people are talking about it more openly. Like, basically, we've just had enough of not being able to talk about it. When I was a teenager and when I was really sick, my mum in particular, I mean, people were so ashamed if their child had a problem. They thought that there was a fault in their parenting, or there was something they'd done wrong, or something awful had happened to their child, and just no one would talk about it. And I wish there'd been, I kind of don't wish social media had been around when I was a teenager, but I wish I'd had access to some of the good parts of social media. The information when I was that isolated and lonely, and what I was going through, because I think it would have made some of a difference, to be quite honest. So I do think the perception of mental health is changing, and we are starting to talk about it, and gyms and fitness places and holistic therapies are starting to join up mind and body much more, because our mind is just another part of our body. We've just separated it for ease, basically. But I suppose I am very aware that I am surrounded by it all the time, and the people I surround myself with are also talking about mental health and are interested in it. And when I step out of my own corner of the world and my own bubble, I come across other industries that are still, in just an opinion, 10, 15 years behind in terms of mental health. And I think, I have to remember that not everybody is there yet. So I think there is a bit of a lag, but to be quite honest, as I'm saying this out loud, this might be a little controversial, but the places that I find are a bit behind are the systems that are run by very patriarchal systems. They're sort of run by old school patriarchy. And I think as that starts to change, as millennials step in and become teachers and CEOs, and we have more women and we have more diversity in the top dogs, I do think it will start to change. But at the moment, we're right on that petering edge where we've still got very sort of white middle-aged men kind of running the show in their 50s, 60s, 70s. And as that changes, I do think there'll be a significant difference in how we approach mental health as a race. I think COVID will have made a huge thing on that, because I think a lot of larger, older companies prey on fear, and like, you might get fired or you won't get your bonus, and like there's a real anxiety potentially in the workplace and control, whereas with COVID everybody's remote and there isn't as much control, and people have a bit more freedom and they're still doing good work. And I know it's kind of gone a little bit extreme in some cases where people are working harder than ever because they don't have
there's no separation.
So the structure thing, so like there's pros and cons to that, but I think it will cause a big positive impact, and people being way more inclined to be proactively taking care of their employees, because they've seen the social fabric of companies is kind of it's not as much there, because people are remote and you have to really work on it. That's good.
Moving on a little bit on what you were touching upon. So as a wider society, we're learning more and more what we need to do to look after our mental health, generally speaking. As an individual, if somebody really needs help, what would you advise their first point of call to be? We've said that you can see some help on social media. People are more willing to talk about it. But what would your first point of call advice be if somebody's feeling that I'm really struggling?
I mean, the very first thing is like, well done for realizing that you need help. Just an internal congratulations, being that day where you go, do you know what, I need some help with this, is huge.
Yeah.
That's the biggest step that you ever take, realizing that you need help and finding the willingness and the open-mindedness to ask for it.
Yeah.
The next bit is asking for help. So if you find that you are in a position where you have someone, a close friend or a family member that you can confide in, that's sometimes really helpful, because that family member, isn't going through what you're going through and isn't clouded by what's happening to you. And they may be able to say, okay, well, let me see what support is available and kind of help guide you. Or if you know someone who's been through something similar, they can often kind of point you in the right direction. These are very subtle sort of things that you can do. And I'm thinking for people who find it very difficult to ask for help. But more often than not, when you start talking, people say, oh yeah, I went through that. Or I was speaking to someone yesterday who was basically, when their boss kind of came back to them, they were having some problems with anxiety, that she said, oh yeah, I've had this, I've had major problems with anxiety 4 times in my life. And this person found it really difficult to ask for help. But the response she got was total identification. And I think that's really important to remember, because you just don't know how many people are experiencing the same thing. And the way I like to think about it for me is like, okay, I'm just a normal human being. Like, I'm just a normal human being, pretty average on the earth, equal to everyone else. If I'm experiencing this, there are other people experiencing this.
Yes. So
if you can talk to someone, that is your first port of call. And talking is so important, because it basically it sort of lets any shame come out of the problem. As soon as someone says, oh yeah, I've been there, or my family member had that, or my friend went through that, the shame dies. And it feels much, much, much smaller of a problem than it does when you're sitting with it on your own. And in the back of the mental health workout program, there's a section called Physio for Your Feelings. And most of the physio exercises are like, okay, now talk to someone. Now talk about it. Because we gain, our neuro pathways heal when we're witnessed, when we're in communication with other people. I think that's partly why lots of people's mental health has suffered during COVID, because it's one thing being on Zoom, but there's something very different being with someone in person and going, do you know what, I've been suffering with panic attacks, let's say, and the other person says, yeah, I've been there as well. This is what I did. There's something so healing to our, I don't know what you call it, to the neuro pathways. I'll use that again. The neurochemical response, that's probably the biochemical response in that. So a sort of a long-winded way of saying, like, well done for asking for help, and keep talking about it until you get what you need.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. And I find that so powerful, actually, talking about and having a shared experience, or connecting and getting that empathy from somebody, and giving that empathy as well is healing. I think that's very powerful to learn.
Not only is it like spiritually healing, but it's proven, it's scientifically healing. When I used to do trauma work when I was allowed to be in a room with lots of people, the whole part of the whole thing was that it was being witnessed. And often people would say, I don't want to talk about my trauma in front of 4 or 5 other people. And when you explain, but that is how you heal. When you talk about it and other people witness it, and they come back to you with compassion, empathy, and identification, your brain that has been stressed out and traumatized for as long as it has been suddenly goes, and that stress response turns off. And suddenly you feel safe, and suddenly you're able to talk about what happened to you and kind of work through it. It's a really big part of healing, being witnessed, being heard, being understood.
Because you always see that in movies, and obviously it happens in real life with the AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. It seems a big thing. Get in a circle, share what your story is.
I always thought that was for accountability. Which I know is obviously a part of it, but just that, I really take that on board, the healing. And I think also as a listener, and you hear this, empathy is important, but just thinking empathy is healing. Is amazing. With that, are there any recent cases or general stories that you've seen from people you've worked with that can give people some hope if they're struggling right now?
Yeah, I mean, I always have stories.
Yeah.
I think the thing at the moment that's coming up for everyone is this like idea that we have to be okay coming out of lockdown as like the regulations change. I was doing a session with a group a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, maybe longer now. And for like the 100th time, someone said like, I just don't want to go out yet. And I was like, okay, guys, like, I don't know who has come up with this person somewhere in our heads that is totally fine and okay and has survived the last 12 months with like no issues, no anxiety, and is like ready to go out and like live life normally again. But as far as I'm aware, they don't exist. Like we've just created that in our head, that we're comparing ourselves against this like idealized person that I haven't come across yet. Everyone has got their stuff about the next 12 months. Everyone is going to be holding stress, grief, trauma from what's happened, whatever your situation has been. And I think when I said that, the whole group were like, oh, okay, so we're all going to have our stuff. It's all going to be slightly different. You know, what we really can do is just listen to each other and be compassionate and not judge how each other are coping. And I could see the whole group kind of go, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then we were able to sort of talk about hope and whatever that means in terms of the future, if you're able to kind of cultivate hope in your life. But that was the first time that I was like, okay, this idealized idea that there's a group of people who are going to be absolutely fine coming out of this pandemic is just not a thing.
Yeah. It's just
it's almost, I don't know if this is a bad expression, but kind of herd mentality. Whereas if you're told, yeah, it's going to be great, let's do it, you're like, okay then, but you're not actually questioning how that feels for you and like understanding the anxiety. And I guess kind of on that point, is there any daily rituals, just from a practical perspective, like any daily rituals you do that kind of set you up for the day or set a foundation or allow yourself to be a bit more in tune with your feelings?
Yeah. So, I mean, I stand by all the stuff that I talk about in your mental health workout as a program. There's like daily and weekly workouts, but specifically at the moment for me, I'm really into more holistic therapies like breath work and meditation.
Nice.
And movement, like trying to be in my body, because I realized, and some people will be surprised to hear this, I'm not particularly, but some people will be, I realized coming up to the end of this last lockdown that I was holding so much stress in my body and I hadn't really acknowledged it. And I started to get like dry skin, and stress ultimately for everyone, it targets like the weakest parts of your physiology. So I tend to get like dry skin or a tummy ache or spots. And then it also targets so much like skin stuff or like digestion stuff for me, but then it also targets like the weakest parts of the most vulnerable parts of your psyche. So if you're sort of low on things like patience or tolerance, or you find it really difficult to motivate yourself when you're stressed, those will be the first things that suffer. And
Okay.
it's a really good thing to kind of so when I start noticing those things in myself, in my body, or in my more emotional landscape, I'm kind of like, oh, I think I'm stressed. I find it very difficult to recognize stress in myself because I can be quite fast paced and I'm a doer, and I don't sort of suffer fools. I just kind of get over and get on with it and get it done. And lots of people out there will be the same or similar. So at the moment, the things that are really soothing to me and the things that are really helping me stay in touch with my feelings are very much kind of body scans, mindfulness, doing stuff like now that we're allowed out, stuff like acupuncture. The thing that I always give to people as like a number one tip in terms of getting used to being connected to your feelings is when you get up in the morning, check in with yourself and ask, like, how am I today? It may take a while for you to actually realize what the answer is, but the fact is you're asking yourself the question, not how do I want to feel today? How do I want today to go? How am I going to make today a good day, a happy day, a grateful day? Just how am I today? And once you get your answer, how are you going to work with that? I'll give you an example. So earlier in this week, I had a day, I think it was Tuesday. And I knew I wasn't all right when I woke up. I felt like disappointed, let down, angry, sad. And I was just like, okay, this is what I'm working with today. And I went into my first call, and it wasn't a client, it was a something else call. And they said, how are you? And I said, not having the best day. I'm just feeling a bit disappointed and let down today, but I'm sure it will lift as the day goes on. And it did. But it was helpful to acknowledge that, because then I could process it. Whereas if I'm going around going, yeah, I'm good, I'm fine, everything's good, this is good, but deep down I'm feeling sad, disappointed, and let down. Basically, we abandon ourselves, and we don't work with ourselves, we work against ourselves. So when I work with new groups, the first thing I ask them to do is to create a daily ritual of checking in first thing in the morning, and then if you want, last thing at night as well. I tend to do breath work at night, but those are like my bookends, like checking in and then doing the breath work before I go to sleep, and it helps me go to sleep. And then in between, all the other stuff: movement, therapy, connection, socializing in a safe and COVID friendly way. Yeah, so there are lots of things, but I think those are the two.
Yeah, those are your two
highlights.
Key. Yeah. Now, there's two things I've really taken from that. Firstly, breath work. Love breath work. Sam and I, especially at the beginning of COVID, we did it a lot. I don't think we've ever found anything that's really helped us release the emotions that you're carrying. We just find that breathwork just brings it all out, whether that's real happiness and hope or it's sadness and frustration. Just like, I don't know, it just felt like a massive release for me. And actually, you mentioning it has made me realize I really need to go back to doing that, because that was such a good, I find I'm too maybe hyper to meditate, but with breathwork, I really could give that time. So yeah, that's a really good tip. And then the second one is just allowing yourself to feel how you feel and acknowledging it with others, and creating and everyone finding that that's okay to do. And, not everyone has to be fine all the time. And, going into a meeting and everyone's like, oh, how are you? You're like, I'm okay. It's not my best day, but I'm okay. And actually how that releases it for you. I think, I'm the type of person who'd be like, yeah, I'm okay. I'm good. Yeah, I'm great all the time.
Like, oh,
yeah, exactly. And inside I'm like, I'm a bit over it today. And actually saying that more often is good.
Well, on that point, actually, what is, for somebody that's listening and on the other side of that, so that it's, say they're in work and somebody comes in and says, yeah, I'm not feeling good today. Like,
what's a good follow-up?
Yeah, and I always rush to, how can I help? Like, what is solution? I know that's not always the right thing, or most of the time it probably isn't the right thing. Like, is there one or two tips on that? If you're the person on the other side and you're dealing with someone in a relationship or a family member who's just down and you're not sure what to do, like, is there a couple of things that are useful on that?
I think you can just, I'm trained in it because I'm a therapist, but reflective listening is the most helpful thing. Someone says, I'm not having a great day. I'm sorry, not having a great day. Is there anything I can do? Not really. Okay, well, I'm here if you need me. Yeah. Rather than jumping in to try and fix how the person feels. Funny enough, I was writing a post, I'm going to post it later, but things that we can do to support each other coming out of the trauma of the pandemic. And one of them is like, give yourself permission to feel your feelings and know that you can't fix anyone else's feelings.
Yeah.
Because we're so like, oh my God, what can I do? How can I make you feel better? I do it as well, Yeah. There are people around me that are like, can you just let me be angry? I'm like, oh yeah, let me just let you be angry.
Yeah.
But I'm like, okay, so it's hard.
Yeah.
But being able to be like, okay, I hear that you're down, or I hear that you're angry. Is there anything you need me to do? Ask them. And then they have the option to say, not right now, but I'll come back to you if I can think of anything. Or they get to be in the driving seat of what's going on for them. Because ultimately, what people don't like is when we take away their agency. And when we say we do something or say something that attempts to take away their feelings or fix their feelings, often the person gets further upset or angry because their experience of being them in that moment is, you're trying to change it, you're trying to take it away from them. And really what they want is just to be like, okay, this is how I am today, and I want to work or live in an environment that accepts all the sides of me, not just the side of me that's like productive and on top of things and happy.
Yeah.
So accept it, active listening, ask if they need anything, and respond accordingly to that.
Let them drive it.
No,
Yeah,
really
let them
good
drive
advice.
it.
Let them drive it. Gosh, I mean, there's still so many things I want to ask.
More questions, which we won't go through. Don't worry.
I think we've covered. If you have any additional tips for dealing with stress, I think we've covered that a little bit with daily routine and your checking in at the beginning or the end of the day, how you're feeling, and then accepting and acknowledging that feeling. But is there any other tips that you have for handling stress or burnout?
Yeah, stress and burnout are really big topics at the moment.
Yeah.
So don't be surprised to hear.
Yeah.
I think the number one thing I say with stress is, if you are stressed, if you're experiencing those stress responses, whether it's your body or your mind reacting, you have to give yourself to step away from the stressor. So the thing that's stressing you out, you have to, I don't, it sounds a bit harsh, but I don't care what it is. It can be your kid, your cat, your job, your finances, your eating, whatever it is that's stressing you out. Just give yourself permission to step away from it, just for a bit, not forever. You're not letting go of it forever, but just to step away from it. Because the stressor is one thing, but if we deal with the stressor and we don't deal with the stress response, we just sort of put a plaster on the wound. And often if we concentrate on the stressor and handling the kid, the cat, the job, the family, whatever it is that's stressing you out, we continue to try and fix things outside of ourselves rather than handling our stress response internally and letting that complete, because it's a whole thing. There's cortisol, there's adrenaline, there's all sorts of chemicals kicking off inside of you. And if you were, I always use this example, but in the wild, like any other animal other than humans, because fundamentally we're just animals, but any other animal, if they have a stress response, they fight, flight, freeze, or fawn is the other one. So if they do any of those things after the threat, which is the stressor, has gone, they then get up from that position, say they've frozen or they've played dead, and they like shake out all the adrenaline, and they go on a long run and they get rid of the buildup of the cortisol and they naturally flush it out.
Yeah.
For some reason, human beings have developed a lifestyle that means we just sit still.
Yeah.
So the stress stays in your system. So you have to give yourself permission to breathe, sigh, run, laugh, scream, and do all the things that are actually going to allow your body to complete the stress response, because then you'll be able to deal with the stressor.
Yeah.
So top tip, step away from the thing that's stressing you out first. Give yourself permission to do that, and then deal with the stress, deal with what's going on in your body. Give yourself the opportunity to release that energy, release that buildup. Then you can go back and handle the boundaries around the thing that's stressing you out, whether that's work boundaries or boundaries with your kids or boundaries with your cat. I don't know, my cat's really annoying. I don't know why but she can be really annoying.
I thought I heard scratching on the door when the podcast started. That's really good advice in general. It's just like trying to be a bit more objective and try and almost step outside and go, what's a good thing for Sam to do in this situation, and try to kind of remove a little bit. No, that's really, really good.
I hope to.
There's just one thing I'd like to add as well, actually, on burnout, which again, possibly a little bit controversial, but I believe that burnout stems from not feeling good enough. So with burnout, if you work on your self-esteem, you will burn yourself out less, because we tend to overdo things because we're trying to escape feeling less than or not feeling good enough. And if you can work on liking yourself as you are and doing the good enough stuff that we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, you are much less likely to burn yourself out, because you'll believe that you're good enough. You don't need to keep overdoing things and burning yourself out in order to prove something. I just think that's a really important thing in terms of burnout.
That's a very important add-on.
Like there's a friend of mine who works in finance, and we're on a bit of a journey together this year because we're trying to change lots of things in our lives. But he was like until 8, 9, 10 o'clock every night, and in that cycle of burnout, basically. And then he kind of finally realized, look, I'm just going to strip back the hours. I'm going to leave at 6 and see what happens. And he's been doing that now for 2 or 3 months, and everything's fine. His boss is
nothing happened.
Work performance is really good. It's like a job will take up all the time you give to it, and it doesn't necessarily mean you're being more productive or being more effective. It's just Yeah, it's a weird hole you can kind of jump into.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely. And actually I have so many things I want to say about that bit, the power of thinking I am good enough. I think we find that running a business, and you probably find that as well, running your own business enterprise, there's always more you can be doing, and you always feel like there's more you can be doing, and you just get so caught up in this list of to-dos and goals that you should be reaching and targets you want to hit, and forget to just go that or realize that, this is a continuous cycle. I am good enough. I am making changes with every small step I take. And sometimes there'll be leaps and sometimes it'll be a tiptoe, and it's all fine, and it's just so hard to keep reminding yourself that.
Like, part of the reason we set this up was to have more time. I think everyone that sets up a business, like, have more flexibility and more time. And we're 4 years doing it. It probably took 3 years for us to feel comfortable taking an afternoon off during the week to just go and enjoy the sunshine or whatever. It's really weird. It's just hardwiring. Kind of just moving on to creativity and happiness. Like, we know as a company, and we see it in the studio all the time, like there is science behind the benefits of being creative. What role do you think creativity can play in somebody's recovery or kind of happiness or mood?
I think it's pretty big, to kind of put it bluntly. You have to remember that only like 25% of our communication is words. The rest of our communication is non-verbal, and so it can be in any other form other than actual words. And creativity gives you the outlet for the other like 75% of your communication, of your feelings. And one of the things that I think contributed to the sort of lockdown fatigue that people were getting was the lack of creativity and inspiration and motivation for things other than, desperately trying to think of things to talk about with your partner or your flatmate or your family, or indeed yourself if you were on your own. Our brains are hardwired for inspiration and motivation and learning and growth. And when we don't get that, it's like, the chains are still going, but there's no oil going in, there's no fuel going in, so they get very tired and rusty. And I think that was kind of why we got so tired, myself included, especially during that first lockdown. So I think creativity is really important in terms of literally keeping like the gears of your brain healthy and working. And there's a protein, I'm going to give you some science now, there's a protein that we call BDNF, brain-derived neurotopic factor. I may have said that wrong.
Sounds legit to me.
But that is created usually through exercise, but through any form of creativity, or anytime the brain is active in a way that anytime the brain is active in a way that it isn't just sort of sitting down and talking and being stagnant, basically, that protein is creating really strong, sturdy support systems for the healthy neural pathways in your mind. So if you're on a recovery journey, if you are working on anxiety, if you're recovering from an addiction, or you're indeed transitioning careers, just to name some of the things that we've talked about, using creativity to literally wrap a support system around the new neural pathways in your brain is a really helpful thing to do, to kind of put it bluntly. You also have to remember that the limbic system, sorry to go all sciencey on you all of a sudden, but
this is great.
The limbic system in the brain can't tell time. It doesn't know when things are actually happening and when they're not actually happening. It's our frontal cortex that can tell time and can like line things up in a sort of intellectual way. So when we use our limbic system to be creative, or we visualize something, you can heal things that aren't even happening now. And I think a lot of people use exercise to do that. I think a lot of people use art to do that. I think a lot of people use, even sort of nowadays, the more sort of technical, like online stuff, graphic design, and creating things like apps for people to use in a really creative way, or even gaming. A lot of that is actually accessing that part of our brain, and used well, can heal some of the sort of unconscious wounds that we have. So whatever your creativity is, just let it run, let it go, make time for it, include it in your self-care, especially if you are working with any kind of panic or low mood or anything like that, it will help in the long run.
Nice.
Wow.
That is a good answer.
That is a brilliant
I've
answer.
learned a lot.
Yeah. So
Wow.
let it go, because it literally is creating a support system.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like
go.
I always imagine it's like like if you had a sore knee, you like wrap a like cheesy grip around it, or you put a support on. I think of BDNF as that for the brain.
Oh,
So
wow.
any opportunity to create a support, a muscle support for the mind, we might as well take it.
Yes,
Yeah,
definitely. Gosh. Who has influenced you the most in your work that you do and your approach? Because one thing I've really learned from this, which I guess I didn't really realize before about you, Zoe, is you have a really holistic approach to therapy and looking after your brain and your mind. And it seems like you get your inspiration and guidance from lots of different sources. But yeah, who has been, or what has been the most inspirational?
Yes, good question. I've got lots of inspiration from many different areas. I've worked with people who I've just thought are amazing therapists, and they've taught me to think in particular ways or understand particular concepts, and I kind of take that with me. But I think in terms of the more sort of holistic changes, I don't say this very often on podcasts. This is the first time I've sort of shared this, but I spent a few years working a 12-step program, not because of an addiction necessarily, but for the sort of spiritual aspect of it. And although I don't necessarily go to meetings, that like spiritual model for life really works for me. And the idea that like tuning into your higher self and listening to what your body needs, or indeed when you don't know what to do, being able to lean on whether it's a higher power or another person, whatever your sort of whatever your support system looks like, and trust and have faith that you will be okay, is something that like fundamentally changed me as a person. So I have inspiration from actual people everywhere. There are particularly women in my life that I've found sort of particularly inspirational, and there have been dancers and therapists and authors that have all contributed to the way that I am and the way that I think. But I think learning to have faith, not in a religion or a god or anything like that, but have faith in that I can handle whatever's thrown at me, and really feel that, is what in some ways inspires me to kind of just trust myself. Things, if that makes any sense.
Oh my gosh, it makes so much sense and is giving me shivers. It is, because I was actually reading something today. That's just to reflect on what you're saying. I was reading something today that, you know, nature looks after everything. Nature looks after the trees. It looks after animals. They're not worrying, how will I be tomorrow? How will I be okay? So if nature can look after them, you should trust that it'll look after you, no matter what happens. And I thought, that is so true. It's just fact. You know, they don't think, oh, what will happen? Oh, I'm really stressed about this lion. That's, they just do, and they know, and they will be looked after. So we should believe that more. And so what you're saying very much resonates. Yeah, I really I hear
that's it. And it's kind of, I always feel a bit sort of self-conscious sharing it because it's so sort of unscientific, but there is that kind of like, it'll be okay.
It'll be okay.
You know, it'll be okay. I get stressed out sometimes about little things, and I'm like, oh, hang on, practice what you preach, la 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 la. I'm like, it'll work out, it'll be okay. And with that, the other side of that, of course, is the sort of manifesting side of things. So when you believe things would happen, you don't have to be like into like, you know, spells and potions, although that's fine if you are. But the belief that things will be okay usually means that they will be okay.
It's a self-fulfilling thing.
So kind of last question, very sadly. So kind of, I get like, what does the future look like for Zoe? And kind of where can people find out about you, and what have you got coming up? I know you've mentioned the book, so feel free to chat a little about the book and mention the release date. But what's the future like? And how can people find out more, and anything exciting coming up?
So I mean, you can find out more on my Instagram, which is at Your Mental Health Workout, and there's a website, yourmentalhealthworkout.com. I also have my own website that I joined, so it's zoeaston.com, and you can contact me through the website really easily. That's where kind of all the information is. The paperback book with the full 5-week program is coming out on the 13th of May. So in time for Mental Health Awareness Month 2021. Tell everyone you know, buy a copy for everyone you know.
Yes. We will.
All that kind of stuff.
And companies, if anyone working in big companies, like every employee could do with this program and would benefit from it, I imagine.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut across you.
Yeah, no, fine. And it's super simple. Like, I've read it so many times. I'm like, is this too simple? But then I've had very good feedback. So I'm just, again, trusting that it will be good for people. What does the future look like? I to be quite honest, I just kind of roll with the punches, as you may have kind of gathered. I currently split my time between my private practice and my consultancy work and the sort of more media relations stuff. And I'm really happy doing that. I've got lots of ideas for other books and sort of concepts that might help people. So I am personally, and it might sound a bit odd that I don't have like massive career ambitions, but like I'm very happy with what I kind of give to the world, and I kind of sit comfortably in that place. And as things come in for me, I will kind of go with the flow. So I suppose what does the future has in store is more of the same, to be quite honest. And just keep unraveling.
Well, as you said, you love following your potential, so that's wherever your potential is leading you, whatever ideas, that's where you go.
It's really refreshing to hear that, because so many people are in the field 10 years time want to do this. It's really nice that you're just content and happy and working hard and doing a really good job of what you're doing now, and not worrying about 20 years time, because 20 years time would be great if it's as good as now. Keep doing what you're doing.
That's so true.
I would add to that though, just as a sort of caveat, like I understand as well that I'm in a relatively privileged position in terms of my side of sort of foundations and my education and the sort of not possibilities, the opportunities that I've had in life that have been presented to me. And I think, if you do worry about stuff in the future, that's also completely normal depending on where you are right now. So, I think it's also really helpful to say that, because it's very easy from a place of privilege to say like, oh yeah, I'm not really worried about the future. But, someone who comes from a completely different background to me and has different experiences may be like, but of course I'm worried about the future, what's going to happen to me, and that's okay too.
Makes total sense.
Absolutely. Well, before we really close off, I was just curious, you mentioned there's some authors that you loved. I don't know, can you recommend any podcasts or authors, books to read, as well as obviously your mental health workout that's coming out next month? For people.
So in the back of your mental health workout is a whole list of authors and psychotherapists that have inspired me. I can't remember all the names off the top of my head right now, but there's like a full sort of, it's not necessarily a reference list because I don't quote them exactly, but it's all the people who have inspired my work. Brené Brown is a big one. People like Pia Melody, who you may or may not know, she's sort of a pioneer in terms of codependence and trauma work. I'm gonna feel awful now because I'm gonna forget some of them, but there's a guy called Bessel van der Kolk who writes about how the body stores trauma and stress. And there's another author called Gabor Mate, who is a bit more scientific, but Hungarian guy, works a lot with addictions and trauma. His stuff is excellent.
Heard that name.
Yeah, he's brilliant. Who else? I think that was kind of that's my top 4.
That first come to mind.
So
brilliant.
Nice.
Gosh, well, thank you so much, Zoe. I feel like I've learned so much in the space of an hour. And I'm so excited about your book coming out. I'm really looking forward to it. I'll be reading that. Everyone, please check out Zoe's website. Even her free training, Your Mental Health Workout, is really, really good. I went through some of the videos last week and I found them so insightful. So please do that.
Good.
And thank you so much, Zoe, for your time.
Thank you for having me.
So that's the end of that episode. We really hope you enjoyed it and would love to hear what you learned. If you haven't yet, be sure to click that subscribe button and get first dibs on all future episodes.
Also, be sure to check out the previous ones because there's some fantastic nuggets and amazing guests there too. We do this podcast for free in the hope that you can benefit from it. So any support you can give us would be incredible. Please tell your friends, tell your neighbors, your parents, your cats and dogs about it. We would love to really grow this podcast even better. Please leave us a review. We love reading them.
And if you'd like to explore that creative side of yours, be sure to check out at M.Y.O London or at Creative Jungle Co on Instagram and get in touch.
Here's to a much more creative and happier life.
You got this, you creative legend.